Hi and welcome back to Storytime with Alex. We're now on what we'll call Chapter 7b because we split up because it was quite long. Miles and Ruth met up with Rose, the last witch of Old Albion, in the park, and Father Bennet, who turned out to be Abbot Joseph from 350 years ago. They've heard more stories about what happened after the rift, and Miles believes that Mr. Campbell might be the person who is stealing the cats. He's very keen to get into his house, but they're also going to go to a meeting that Mr. Campbell has set up to discuss the disappearance of the cats. So let's see what happens in the rest of this chapter. On Friday, I broke up for the Christmas holidays and wandered over there in the early afternoon on my way home from school. I was poking about the bushes round by Mr. Campbell's house when I met Father Bennet, who was talking with a tall man I did not recognise. "Are you casing the joint, Miles?" he said merrily as the stranger walked away. "No, I don't think I'd be a very good burglar. I managed to look over his fence. He doesn't have any soundproof sheds or anything." I must admit I had a little look too. Rose tried to spell to see if she could find the cats, but there were wardings all over Mr. Campbell's house to prevent any seeing spells. "But that proves he's mixed up in magic," I said excitedly. "Yes, it does, doesn't it? Which is odd in a world with so little real magic. Still, let's see what happens at the meeting. As you said, it would be much better if we could just get the cats back before anything else happens." "My Misty's disappeared now. Do you think they're all right?" "They have to be for the spell to have the slightest hope of working. Remember all those tins of cat food as well. I'm sure they're okay. Let's see what happens tomorrow." All the time we had been talking, he had been gazing at the grassy hump in the middle of the gardens. "That's where the tower stood, isn't it?" I said, hoping he would tell me more. I was not disappointed. "What do people nowadays say was there?" he asked. "Some still say it was a beacon, but my dad thinks it was a fountain," I replied. "Well, that is true. There was a fountain here. When I had Aubrey House built, I got them to build a fountain there so that no one would get curious about the hump in the middle of the lawn." "So what's there? Is it just a pile of rubble?" "No. Under there is the crypt. That's where the thin place is located." "What is it like?" "People use the word unearthly in a very lazy way nowadays, to mean weird or spooky. But the light in the crypt really is unearthly. It's a light that comes from another world. It leaks through and is just there in the middle of the dark crypt. It doesn't fit. It's the wrong light. Of course, I've not seen it for about 250 years. When we were first here, we cleared the stairway down, and Rose covered the way in with a glamour. That's a disguising spell. We hoped to find our way back home, but when it became clear that not only could we not get through, but it would be dangerous for anyone else to attempt it, we blocked the entrance with stones from the wall and buried it in soil. We even planted brambles on top of it and put spells upon it." I thought for a minute, then said, "But how do the cats get out? If they can come through from the other side, won't they just get stuck in the crypt?" "That is a question we have often asked ourselves, Miles. When I lived in Aubrey House, I scoured the garden for secret entrances and the like. Perhaps there's some kind of magical cat flap." "But the Attrag people must have found a way in." "Indeed. I wonder how." I think there were usually about half a dozen people at the Attrag meetings, but the hall in the community centre was almost full. Because it was so near Christmas, there had been a community carol concert earlier on, put on by the Scouts and Guides, so the room was fully decorated with garlands and tinsel and branches of holly from the gardens behind. I went there with Mum and Dad, and Father Bennet was there with Miss P. He had wheeled her there in a wheelchair and sat next to her in her chair near the back. He smiled over at us. It dawned on me that Miss P did not know who he was. He was just a priest who'd come to help in the parish. I'd not even had the opportunity to tell her what I now knew about him. Did she even know about the existence of the Wizard Sebastian Jones? Dead on 6 o'clock, Mr. Campbell and the other Attrag committee members appeared from the little office at the side and climbed the steps onto the stage. They all sat on a row of chairs, except Mr. Campbell. He had his journal under his arm and opened it on the lectern. He tapped the microphone. He was already really annoying me, and he hadn't said anything yet. I kept remembering recycling all those cat food tins. He talked the whole meeting just like he had talked to me, as if we were all about 6 years old. He told us, as if we did not already know, that cats had been going missing in the Triangle and that he was really sorry about that. I'm not sure how many of us believed that. He said that he had been in contact with the police, but that this was not a big priority for them, especially at this time of year when there were so many burglaries. He droned on a bit and I stopped listening until he started telling us about a white van that had been seen around the triangle and that there seemed to be Eastern Europeans who might well be kidnapping our cats. Mum got very prickly at this point. She stood up. Are you implying that people from Eastern Europe are all dishonest, or that they are likely to have stolen our cats merely because they're foreigners? Of course not, Mrs. Burton, but someone has taken our cats, and I am just suggesting a possible line of inquiry. He was talking to her like she was a child, and I prepared myself for a real argument. I was not disappointed. Mum stood up straighter. And what proof do you have of the existence of this white van? She looked around. Has anyone else seen one? In fact, would it not be better to ask all of us if we've seen anything suspicious? For example, has anyone seen someone with dozens of tins of cat food that they would not normally have? I quite enjoyed the expression on his face, but he recovered. Well, I have seen a white van with several strangers acting suspiciously within the triangle. Have any people seen things they think might be suspicious? Several people put up their hands. Mr. Campbell had given a microphone to his wife to pass to people in the audience who wanted to speak, which added a layer of fuss, and it all took ages. There were always white vans around, so several people reported seeing one. Mr. Jackson pointed out that several houses in the triangle were having building work done, which accounted both for the white vans and the Eastern Europeans. Various members of the ATRAG committee on the stage looked annoyed at this. People were upset about their cats going missing, and everyone seemed to have something to say, a theory to share about what had happened to the cats and who had done it. No one suggested that they had been stolen away to take part in a magical spell to open a way to another world, but that was no surprise. People just wanted somebody to do something about it, without really knowing who that somebody might be, or what they might do. After some time, the argument seemed to be subsiding, when Father Bennet stood up. I sort of assumed he would try and get everyone to calm down, but he repeated what Mrs. Dubois had said about the need to call in the police, and what kinds of residents' action group was it that would let cats go missing in the first place. Mrs. Campbell got up to defend her husband, and everyone started up again, some of them even more quarrelsome than before. More people stood up to have their say. Then a tall, thin man came into the room. He slipped into the chair behind Father Bennet and whispered in his ear. The priest turned around, and the stranger distinctly shook his head. After that, Father Bennet seemed to lose interest in the meeting. It soon came to an end, with Mr. Campbell telling us all that he would tell the police all the various theories we had come up with, and all the suspicious people we had seen. The tall man disappeared again, and Father Bennet wheeled Miss P home, so I still had no chance to tell her who he was. The next day, Sunday, Mum and Dad had something mysterious of their own to do in the afternoon. I hoped to do with my Christmas present, rather than anything magical. They had already asked Miss P to keep me occupied by asking me to help her put up her Christmas decorations. They were pleased to tell me that Ruth would be there as well. I was getting to like her, but not in the sugary way Mum and Dad seemed to think. I was hoping it would give us a chance to discover what we were going to do next. Miss P had given us a key because it was so difficult for her to answer her door, so after lunch I let myself in. She was sitting in her chair with a letter open on her lap and a thoughtful expression on her face. Ruth was in the kitchen putting on the kettle. Good afternoon, Miles. I've just had a very interesting experience. Father Bennet came to me, give me communion, and when we'd finished he gave me this letter. It's from Mistress Rose Cooper, explaining exactly who Father Bennet is. I knew she'd not come alone into this world, but she'd never told me details about Abbot Joseph and the wizard Sebastian Jones, and now she tells me about them in this letter. I suppose she did not feel it was right to share their existence without asking them, and neither of them had been around for a while. But I understand Ruth and you already know about Father Bennet, indeed that you guessed who he was. Well, she told us about his part in their story, and then we met him with her in the big park, so it was not difficult to work out who he is. I suppose not. It's very frustrating being stuck in this wheelchair. I'll be so pleased when I can get out this cast and walk again, assuming that stupid little man, Mr. Campbell, and his wife don't bring about the end of the world. He hasn't got all the cats he needs yet. Even with Misty he's only got 10. I've asked around. I don't think there are any more descendants of Gloriana. What if there just aren't enough cats for the spell? They've gone to so much trouble that I'm sure they must have figured that out. Gremlin and I have come to an agreement that she's not going any further than the conservatory door. Your mum kindly bought me a litter tray and some litter, and even if he somehow lured Gremlin away, that's still only 11. I wonder if we've missed a cat somewhere. I don't think so, Ruth said, coming in with a tray of mugs of tea. But as you say, he's gone to so much trouble, it seems unlikely that he just can't count to 12. Father Bennett, Abbot Joseph, said he'd drop in later after taking communion to a couple of other people stuck at home. I don't think he wants to miss anyone just before Christmas. So, if one of you can take my box of decorations out of that cupboard over there, and the other bring in the holly branches Mrs. Dubois gave me from her garden, we can get on with making this place look festive. If you remember, there's that little tree in a pot out in the back garden that I bring into the conservatory and decorate. Do you think you'll be able to move it between you? Don't worry if you can't. I fetched a large cardboard box from her dresser cupboard. She had glued pieces of Christmas paper to it, so even the box looked festive. Ruth carefully brought in the holly. Under her instruction, Ruth set up the crib scene. I put the tinsel garlands round the picture on her wall. There was a mechanical Santa Claus that played Christmas tunes and all sorts of other Christmas ornaments that we put on various tabletops and shelves. I was pleased to find that I could bring the tree in its pot from the garden without Ruth's help, and we festooned it with fairy lights and tinsel and hung bright glass baubles from its branches. I was enjoying myself so much that I forgot all about mysterious bridges and missing cats until the doorbell rang. I went to answer the door while Miss P wheeled herself into the kitchen to make some tea. Father Bennett stood there, and behind him the tall man he had been talking to at the Attrag meeting. They came in, and Father Bennett said, "Good afternoon, Ruth and Miles. I see you've been helping Miss Phillips with her decorations. It looks very festive." Miss P came back in, and he continued, "May I introduce you all to Wizard Sebastian Jones?" Sebastian Jones did not look like the kind of person to ever feel at home in Miss P's neat little cottage. He was tall and very thin, with spiky white bleached hair and a scar across his forehead. He had a dozen silver earrings of various designs in each ear and a ring in one side of his nose. He wore a dark blue duffel coat that was much too big for him, scuffed black leather trousers and black boots with flames on them. When he took off his coat, he had a leather waistcoat and an old black t-shirt with what I guess was the name of a band on it, and a skull with a snake coming out of the mouth. Ruth was staring at him as if she were in love. Okay, as aforementioned in Storytime with Alex, I will not be doing the accent because I do not want to offend the entirety of Wales. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Phillips," he said in a strong Welsh accent, which I'm sure you can imagine, shaking her hand. "And I'm pleased to meet you too, Ruth, Miles." He shook hands with each of us too. He wore lots of strange silver rings on his fingers. When Joe came to see me, I realised it was time to come back. I last walked these streets 5 years ago, and then only in the middle of the night. "Come and have a cup of tea and some cake," said Miss P, and we all sat around her table. Sebastian Jones's legs were so long that he seemed to find it difficult to fit them under the table. "I think I can best introduce myself by telling you my story, or at least one of my stories. It's a habit I picked up from Rose, and it will explain a lot of what's going on at the moment in the Triangle. And you can come back and hear that story next time. Thank you.